Hello, I'm Michael Wozniak, Vice President of Tony Buzan International.
Hi, I'm Nathalie de Marseille, Senior Instructor for Tony Buzan International. We are delighted to spend a moment with Kate Benson today. She is the Director of Education for the Society of NLP, and she also co-authored the book Teaching Excellence with Dr. Richard Bandler. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much, Nathalie. Thank you so much, Michel. It's delightful to be here with you guys again.
Thank you very much. So we have plenty of questions for you because it's a very special moment. It's 50 years since Tony Buzan passed away, and we want to take this opportunity to celebrate his work and also to talk about his passion, which is education, and the passion that you share, in fact. Perhaps would you have a few words to say about your journey? You know, how did you come up with the concept of teaching excellence?
Well, it's a very long story, so I'm going to give you a reduced version of it. But I fell into teaching by accident. I didn't intend to be a teacher. I was a lawyer. My degree is in law, but I took some time out, needed a job. Somebody offered me a job doing some teaching. I thought, well, I'll try that for a while. And I fell in love with teaching. And I particularly fell in love because the kids who I was teaching, along with a very amazing group of young, enthusiastic teachers, were kids who had been failed by the education system. They certainly were failing to thrive, either because they'd been excluded, or they weren't engaged, or they had missed a lot of school, but for one reason or they hadn't got the basics in place, and they were disillusioned and disaffected and disengaged. I call it the 3 Ds. I discovered, I suppose, through quite a long process, that I was quite good at this. Somehow I just had a bit of a gift for teaching these kids, and I liked them. And I think that was the biggest part of it, was I liked them, and nobody else had ever liked these kids. And so my journey began on that. And then because of the time when we were developing new ideas, all of education was then content driven. And what these kids lacked was fundamental skills, fundamental thinking skills, fundamental literacy and numeracy, the skills that get you through everyday life. So we got quite good at it because we had to. Necessity was the mother of invention, really, because these kids did not have to be in the room. And if they weren't happy, they walked. There was none of this, you've got to be here from 9 o'clock till 3 or whatever. They just walked. So I got quite good at it and did quite a lot of training. Oh, my dog's just let himself in. I'm sorry, Teddy, go away. Sorry. I'll try and ignore him. It's very difficult. And so I then found that I was doing things that other people weren't, and I started training other teachers. And long story short, I set up my own training company to teach people the things that I found quite easy to do, but they found difficult. I also started to think, the big thing for me was this thinking skills. And I actually came across Tony Buzan's work when I was a young on my teacher training course. I don't know, I was about 23 or 24 or something like that. And it was a complete revelation to me. There was somebody here who had a systematic approach to thinking. So I loved his work, and he was a very young man then, very handsome and young. We used to watch his videotapes in our classes. So I was introduced to him and his work long before I encountered NLP. So I set up my training company, was doing quite a good job. And then I had encountered NLP in a therapeutic context, because I'd also trained as a counselor, psychotherapist by this time. And I did a couple of courses, but then I went and worked with Richard and did my training with him, as you guys did. And he kept saying things like, NLP is an educational model. And, I teach NLP quickly because I use NLP to teach NLP, and all these things sort of resonating, all the stories that he would tell, which were about, a lot of it for me was all about learning. And yet all around me, people were using it for therapy and for coaching and for business. And nobody seemed to think that it was appropriate for education. So as you know, I asked him one day the question. And I think, I asked him, how come, you say you can use NLP to teach NLP really quickly, and we're not using it for everything else. We're not using it for history, geography, maths, English, Spanish, physics, chemistry. And he thought this was a really good question. And I guess it's a question he'd asked himself, but there weren't many other people asking him. So we just formed this collaboration, and I went off to find the strategies and practice and borrowed groups and tried things out and experimented, and would then meet up with Richard and we'd have conversations and he'd tell me more stories. And eventually I wanted to put, as part of my master practitioner, a course that my master practitioner for teachers, and a special unit, a special module, which was about the application of NLP for teaching and learning. And we called it Teaching Excellence. So we were running the program, and the book, really, my part of the book anyway, grew out of that whole process of teaching other people how to do what I was already doing, or to a greater or lesser extent. So that's how Teaching Excellence came about. And as Richard said, it took us a long time. We were busy. I was running my business. I was also running courses with Richard, the shamanics and neurohypnotic repatterning, assisting on courses. And so it was an evolutionary process. And every time I went back to it, it was like, oh no, we can do better than this now. We can do better. Oh, we've rewrite. And Richard would say to me, is it done yet? And I go, well, yeah, but I've just got to change this bit. And so I think, but I think that process has been very productive, in that it's it seems to be well received and a pretty effective book for strategies. So that's the potted version.
This is fascinating, Kate, and there are so many questions that I have in my mind with all that you are sharing with us. And there is one particular question that pops into my mind, because you say that there are so many challenges that teachers encounter, and that it was easy for you, but not apparently for the teachers. So what would be the biggest challenges that usually teachers encounter, and how can they overcome those challenges?
Well, there's so many. I think one of the main problems and challenges with teachers is the lack of training that they have. So for me, the teacher training courses, the curriculum for teacher training, doesn't address the fundamental issues that teachers face in the classroom. So, for example, quite rightly, they study the history of education and the history of the Education Acts. They study the philosophy of education. And I'm not saying that these things are not good things to study, but actually getting up in the morning and knowing what you're going to do for the next 5 days with your class and how you're going to do it seems to me a much more fundamental set of skills to have. So actually, the thing that they lack in their education is neuroscience. So they are not taught how the brain processes data, what we know about how learning happens. So they are unable to generate those processes consciously on purpose with their students. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't millions and millions of fantastic teachers all over the world. There are. But a bit like me, they're all stumbling around trying to figure out what the best thing is to do. Some of them find that quite easy. Some of them find it quite difficult. But we're not giving them the strategies that are based in science that show us how learning works. When teachers know how learning works, they can replicate that in the classroom. Teachers work very, very hard. And the problem is that they, what I call scattergun, things that they have tried and might work. So they throw everything they've got at the group. This is good teachers, at their students, hoping that something's going to work. And then when it does, they don't really know why it works. So they have to do the whole thing again the next time. Whereas what we do with teaching excellence is we are very strategic and very pointed in applying the right amount of energy in the right way, doing the right things for the right reasons to get the right results. Because NLP is a model based on elegance, and there is very little elegance in the teaching and learning process that's taught. And then on top of that, the other thing that they really suffer from is the whole, everybody has an opinion about teaching. Everybody thinks they're an expert in education. You know, you don't hear people say things like, well, I went to the doctor, so I know all about medicine. But people go, well, I went to school, so I know everything about education. So just because you've been subject to a process does not make you an expert in it. But everybody, every parent, every politician, every government official thinks that they know all about education. And they don't ask the people who really know, who are the teachers. And so I think that they suffer from this, you know, constant pressure to do something that the politicians think is appropriate at this moment in time, so that they get elected more. And I think one of the things that teachers need to learn to be is a bit radical and a bit rebellious, and actually to use some thinking skills for themselves and go, do you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm not jumping through that hoop, because I am going to prioritize my learners. And I guarantee if every teacher prioritized their learners, they will get fantastic results, and nobody would dare to question the fact that they haven't filled in this set of forms because their students are doing so well. So for me, I would say, you know, one of the best things that people can do is to be a bit radical, get really good at it, and then dare people to challenge you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And there are so many challenges already with regular children, and there are also children who have from troubles, like we could say, like dyslexia, or what is called learning disorders. But what is your opinion, for instance, about the use of mind maps to help those children?
Well, first of all, it's a learning difference, not a disorder. Yeah. It's a teaching difficulty. Yeah. Because you know, it's presented. I think I think mind maps are fantastic for all learners if it's the right strategy for them. Now, with children who've got learning difference, some of them, when we look at dyslexia, back up, when you look at dyslexia, we lump that together. It's a nominalization. Dyslexia. I've got dyslexia. No, you haven't got dyslexia. You do dyslexia. It's not something that you carry around with you, is it? You know, so it's processing. It's how people process. Now, some people who've got the label of dyslexia will have visual processing difficulties, but a lot of them have auditory or spatial processing difficulties, but are very strong on visual. So a methodology like the mind map, which captures so much of the information together in one image, is a really constructive way for some of those children and adults with that challenge to really benefit. And especially if people are challenged with words and reading words, the more imagery we can use, the more color, the more little pictures we can associate with words, the easier it is for them to memorize and to remember and to connect the data together. So I think it's very useful, but I also think it's worth bearing in mind that just like anything else, and I'm sure Tony would agree with this, that we mustn't become dogmatic about a methodology. If it's we introduce these methodologies, we evaluate how well they work, we see if we can improve it with a particular child or a group of children. But if at the end of the day, writing a list works for that child, then writing a list is the thing to do. If recording it works for that child, then recording it is the thing to do. And I'm sure I've seen Tony working with learners, and I know how flexible he was with finding the way for a particular learner. So I think they're an amazing tool for all learners, but particularly those youngsters who've got the challenges of learning differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. And Michel and I have the privilege of having been your students. And
and excellent students you are, both of you. The best students.
An excellent teacher you are. And I know you and Richard Bandler, of course, make so much, you make a point in creating the good brain chemicals before you can teach anything to anyone. Can you talk a little bit about this prompting with the good brain chemicals?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the good brain chemicals, there's no good or bad chemicals in our bodies. There's no good or bad experiences. But what we call those good chemicals are the neurotransmitters that promote learning. And if we can, so they make the brain work. So serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, all of the various neurotransmitting chemicals enable learning to be easy. And so there's a chemical base. You can look at this on a number of different levels. You can look at it like that as a chemist and think, how do we stir up the pot? How do we mix the chemicals together to get just the right mix for that particular learning? Or we can look at it on another level. We can look at it on an emotional or psychological level, whereby when we learn, when we're having fun and we're smiling or we're happy, then actually that we chase that experience. So if you're learning your 27 times table, not that I know my 27 times table, but if we're learning our tables and it's fun, then it's natural to want to go back and recall, remember that, re-experience it. Whereas if it's horrible, then what we do is we move away from bad experiences. And so we don't want to remember it because it was horrible. Unfortunately, humans also do the opposite, don't they? They remember the horrible experiences really well. And sometimes, as I said before, necessity is the mother of invention. My stepbrother is Brazilian and he came at 14 to the UK and didn't speak any English at all. He then went on holiday for the summer with my dad and my stepmom on a boat in the south of France. And when he came back in September, his English was amazingly fluent. And I said to him, how come you learn so quickly? You're amazing. And he went, fear. He was on the front of the boat. My daddy's shouting orders to him. And he thought, if I don't understand what he's saying, we might die. So there are times when, but of course, what you've got then is a whole other set of chemicals raging through. You've got adrenaline and all sorts of other chemicals going through your body, which can also enable people to learn. But it's better, I think we all agree that it's better if we do that with a pleasant experience. And also, so that's a sort of psychological emotional level. We can also look at it on a very practical level from a teacher's point of view. Richard may well have said this already. I know you'll have heard him say it. You know, sometimes we just suffer from too much education. And if we think about who the best learners are, what the best learning state is, it's children, little children who haven't learned to fail yet. So if we get people laughing and joking and we regress them a little bit to their playful nature, then we get all that conscious objection out of the way. So it makes it easier for teachers as well to make it, if you make it fun, because they don't moan and groan and say they can't quite so much. They just get on with enjoying doing it. So it sort of works on a number of different levels, all those wonderful neurochemicals that we use. And of course, the neurohypnotic repatterning program in particular really opened up for me that whole world of neurochemicals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. And since we're talking about the brain, let's talk about those connections in the brain, because mind maps work very much the way that brain connections do. What are your thoughts about the use of mind maps in that context for smart learning and smart thinking?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it's the most, I think mind maps are the most amazing tool, because there's one of the things that it really did was enabled us to encapsulate vast amounts of information in one place. But much more importantly than that, it enables you to connect. And if we think about how we gather information, how we learn stuff, content, first of all, we have data. So we have just like pieces of information, like that. And then we have the next stage when we start to look for information. So information moves on from data in that it highlights or puts in context that data.
Yes.
So it says whether it's important or not important, whether it's, you know, whether it's up here or down there, whether it's big or small. And then we move on to knowledge. And knowledge is about where we connect that piece, that data and that information with each other to make something meaningful out of it, and so on and so forth, until we move up till eventually we get to hopefully something called insight and wisdom. And if we look at how that happens in our brains, where we got all these little neurons that fire off, and then they start to connect up, like that, and then eventually we almost lose the data and lose the information, because what we have is a degree of wisdom that comes out of all of that learning. And mind maps mirror that beautifully, perfectly. That's what they do. Am I right? I mean, you're the experts in mind maps. I'm not as expert. You know, I've always used them, but for me, that seems to be their strength.
Yeah. For me, it's very interesting to highlight this, because sometimes people tend to oppose approaches, like this one is the best or this is the best, and the reality is that it's all complementary. When you start using smartly everything you have in your toolbox, then it becomes powerful.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to listen to you, Kate, and you make things so easy to understand. And I wonder, you must have had in your story, in your background, teachers that inspired you. My question to you is, what do you remember some particular teachers that made something special that you remember, and why? What was that special thing that they brought?
God, there were so many. I mean, I actually believe, and there is the saying, isn't there, that when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. You know, that the right teacher presents themselves to you at the right moment. And of course, it might be that they might be knocking on your door the whole time, but until you're ready, you don't notice them. So there's all those sorts of things. But I'm blessed, I think, that I've had fantastic teachers, and even those teachers who I really didn't like, or found really difficult, also taught me something. So I remember, for example, my French teacher, who terrified me. I learned from him that fear gets in the way of learning languages, because I was quite good at languages until I walked into his classroom, and then it just like closed down like this. So, that you learn from all sorts of, even if it's to never do that again, is good learning. But I had a lot of good teachers. I think I had a teacher called Mr. Smith who taught art, and I was never a particularly artistic child. And I don't know how it is in your systems, but the more academic you are, the less you have the opportunity to do those wonderful things like art and pottery and things when you're at school. It seems a terrible shame to me. So I didn't get very much opportunity to do art. But Mr. Smith was my tutor, and he used to let me come in at lunch times. And he just devoted himself to kids who were enthusiastic. And he taught me that being artistic and creative was not about being able to draw. And it was about doing all sorts of other things. And he also taught me that what was really important for teachers, for kids, was to be liked by their teachers. That goes so far. If you feel cherished and liked by your teacher, that goes so far. So he was very important to me at my secondary school. And I think when I went to university, there were a couple of teachers who were just inspirational, because they believed in me. And I think they believed in me when I didn't believe in me. And they were quite traditional, they were lecturers, but they also taught me that a lecture can be a beautiful thing, a fantastic thing. It can be a whole wonderful sort of package of learning when it's well put together. When it's done badly, it's atrocious. But when it's done well, it's a thing of beauty. And I remember two guys in particular, Steve Redhead and Remy Zentar, who were just amazing to me, and they taught me lots of things. And they taught practical things. And I remember one of them, that Remy Zentar taught us how to revise. And I can still run that lecture in my head. And it's a long, long time ago now. And the revision coach process that I put together is based on his work, because I used that. And I went from getting, like average grades to getting top grades. Wow. Based on that process. And that taught me that being systematic worked for learning. And you just do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And it was, for me, I didn't know then, but what it was a strategy for revision. Mm-hmm. That's what he laid out. That's what we would call it now. So that was really important. And then I have had, even in my adult life, some really amazing people who've taught me. I've had a wonderful spiritual teacher who's no longer with us. And of course, Richard, who continues to inspire me. Mm. And even people who I haven't met, like Tony Buzan. I would have loved to have trained with him, but he was inspirational too, very much so.
Absolutely.
Thank you. The amazing part is that very often when people get to become teachers, it's because they feel a lot of pleasure and a lot of delight to give away their knowledge and their experience. What is your teaching anecdote that you feel the most proud of, and why?
I've been thinking about, I knew you were going to ask me this question. I've been thinking about it for days. That one, no, that one, no, that one. No. It was so hard to choose one. But I think, that with kids, there's lots and lots that I could tell you with kids. And it's always a delight when they're the scales, you know, the joy they have of learning. And actually, so I'm going to cheat and have two because they're very similar, and they relate to spelling, which of course is this. Everybody thinks about the NLP spelling strategy. Why we use spelling so often is because it's a really short strategy that illustrates strategies, and it's a brilliant convincer.
Yeah.
And I have two. One was I was working in a school, and I taught the whole school how to spell. So I went in and taught each class for 20 minutes. I did a presentation and a bit of teaching with all the teachers first, and then they modeled what I did, supposedly. Some of them modeled it really well, some of them didn't. But there was this one little girl, and she was sitting way too far at the back, and she had very, very big, thick glasses on. And I'm thinking, she's a bit far away, really. You know, she's obviously having trouble seeing there, and she'd be better off a bit nearer to me. But she was there, and she was sitting on the table with her teacher. And she looked sort of something like this, and she looked like she was tiny, and she was a bit anxious and nervous looking. And then I saw across the room, just saw the strategy connect through her whole neurology. It went ching like this, and her whole face just lit up. Like, it was just the most beautiful moment. And she didn't need to tell me she'd got it. I could see it. It spread through every single cell of her body. And I remember saying to her afterwards, a little bit later on, I said to her, you really got that, didn't you? And you probably know, you know, I use the secret spy technique to teach children, that you take pictures in your mind, and you put it in your secret place. So we were being spies. And so it's all very conspiratorial, because we don't want other people to know that we're cheating. And she leaned forward and she said to me, "It's so easy." So that was a lovely moment. And my other one was exactly the same thing. I was actually on a course with Richard, and somebody asked him a question about spelling, and he, of course, just looked for where I was in the room and said, Kate, teach her to spell. So in the break, the 15, 20-minute break we were having, I taught her the spelling strategy. And she was probably about 40, this lady, and she felt she was stupid all her life, you know, because she couldn't spell and whatever. And I taught her to spell, and she was furious. She was absolutely incandescent with rage. And I was like, oh dear, this wasn't what I expected. And she said, why didn't anybody teach me this? 30 years, she said. She was furious. Anyway, we talked her down and explained that it wasn't anybody else's fault, and now she knew, and all the rest of it. Well, the next day she came in, and she came in late, and she'd got a flip chart rolled under her arm and a bag full of coloured pens. And she intrepidly, she went around every single people. I think there were about 150 people on this course. She went around every single one of them and made sure that they knew how to spell before they left the program. And I think she was probably my biggest fan in the end of the day. So that was one of my favorites, but there've been lots.
Yes, absolutely fantastic. How when that when the brain connects with a strategy, and what's amazing, it's that it really changes the shape of the brain. So it's absolutely it's a miracle happening before you.
It changes the person, who the person is as well. I think that's the other thing that people forget, is that your students are never the same. If you're a decent teacher, a decent trainer, your students are never the same the next day, because if they've learned something, they've changed who they are. And you can't go back to it. So we are building people as well as building knowledge and information when we're helping people to learn well.
Yes, absolutely. And once Michel and I went to a school, a very prestigious school, and we were talking about with the director, and she was explaining to us that when children come to kindergarten, they are all absolutely gorgeous. And when you ask the parents and the teachers, they all say, oh, they are all geniuses and they have so much potential. And the director was telling us, it's really a shame because when they arrive to primary school, by the end of the first year of primary school, all those geniuses in kindergarten, that they were going to be the next creator, the next artist, the next chemist or whatever. And by the end of the first year of primary school, they had so many struggles, and they could not read correctly, and that could not spell or whatever correctly. So my question to you is, what do you think happened between those geniuses and the edge, and never mind by the end of primary school or secondary school? So what happened there with all those promises and all those geniuses, and how to prevent it?
Well, I think there's two things happening, and one of them we can do something about, and the other one we probably just need to ride through in a way. So the first thing is that, you know, what's happened is too much education. There are schools who don't lose that. You know, those schools who have a free curriculum where they allow children to learn what they want to learn when they want to learn it. And they build in the maths and English and the core skills into whatever it is, whatever the child's passion is. But what we do with children is we date stamp them. We put them on a 19th century production line. So if you think about, it's a useful metaphor is to look at actually how the means of production, how business works. So in the 19th century, you know, we built factories and we put people through, you know, we produced stuff by doing this and then this and then this and then this and this and then and education replicates this. So, you know, you are 5 and at 5 you do this, and then at 6 you do this, and at 7 you do that, and at 8 you do this. So you can't do something at 5 that you really want to do because you've got to wait till you're 8. And on the other hand, if you're not ready to do it at 5 because you're not really going to want to do it until you're 8, you have to, whether you like it or not. So because we're putting through children through the production line of education, as opposed to you know, allowing their learning to flourish in a more natural way. Now, if we look at places like Apple, Microsoft, and what's happening in the, you know, tech world, we've moved away from that model, haven't we? Where we actually sit people down together and let them go like, well, okay, well, how do we create from this? Or we let somebody go off and explore in their own way. And so part of it is the model. Part of it is the expectations of teachers that they won't free themselves from that model and do things in a different way. And I think the solution is very radical. I think we need a complete overhaul of the curriculum to enable us to prepare citizens for the future, which we're not doing now. We are still operating essentially a 19th century education system in the 21st century, and it's not fit for purpose. So that's a very depressing thing to say, I know. But I think that's what needs to happen. There is something else, though, that I think is worth bearing in mind, is that children up to the age of about 5 are all potential. They believe, they don't see any problems. You know, you put a plastic steering wheel on the back of, you know, mummy or daddy's seat in the car, and they're going, they believe they can drive.
Yeah.
They haven't encountered the difficulties of actually changing gear and listening to the instructor and looking forward and looking back and all of those things. They haven't encountered some of the challenges of learning. And so they haven't, and then when they do, it's like, well, I'm not sure I really want to do that because it's really quite hard. And so sometimes the natural process of learning will take some knocks, but of course, if we're building in resilience, if we're building tenacity,
Yes.
if we're building determination, if every time a child fails to do something, it makes them more determined to have another go, then that genius can still thrive. So does that make sense? So part of it is the process itself, but we're not building the skill set that enables people to pick themselves up and move on. And I think that is particularly an issue post-COVID, that we're seeing a lack of resilience in children and lack of tenacity. So I think that there is another thing to bear in mind, though, is that, you know, I always think about the age of children as having a job, you know, and your job when you're 3 is to be Einstein. You know, it's to be the creative force. It's to ask the why questions. Why does it rain? Why is the sky blue? That's the job. But once children get to 7, 8, 9, they have a different job. Because the world is now no longer completely, they're wanting to start to control the world. Up until that point, mummy and daddy and the carers have really looked after it for them. And suddenly they get to an age where in their natural progression, they want to manage, they want to know how much they can manage of the world, how much they can influence. So anybody who's played a board game with a 9-year-old will know how much the rules change. Because it goes like you're playing and they're losing, and they suddenly go, I know, let's do it like this. And then they change the rules so that they're more likely to win. Or they are very obsessed with what the rules are. You know, and I call them, this is the age of the traffic warden. So what they're going around is they're going around telling everybody else who's breaking the rules and who's not breaking the rules, because they're figuring out what the rules are in what the structure is. So part of it is in the nature of the beast, growing up, but part of it is to do with the way we structure our education system.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And what I consider fantastic with children is that there are some children who at school are unable to remember like history dates, for instance. But when you ask them about the dates related to their favorite soccer player or football player, they know everything with no work, with no effort. What happens in their brain, in fact?
Motivation is what the difference is. It's very simple. They want to know all about their own football team. They get excited. They have all the right neurochemicals. They think about, you know, David Beckham or whoever it is the latest people are, and they get all excited. They imagine, you know, when they're playing the games that they're with them or they are them, and it inspires their imagination. It excites them. And then, you know, you give them a list of dates, and it has no relevance, no meaning, no benefit, and it's not exciting. It's as simple as that, really. But it can be. It can be. But why on earth, in this day and age, we're asking people to remember dates? You know, you need, I remember we have a history strategy, Richard and I, you know, we have it's like a ladder. You need certain ones, you need markers, and then you can slot what happens in the right area. I use it like a ladder that goes up like that, and I put things in the right place. I only need a few just to be able to use as markers. So to be able to get the context and the relevance of some dates. So, you know, so for example, you know, if you're taught, you know, well, the date that in English history, you know, the date of Queen Elizabeth I's birth and when she died, and Victoria when she was born and died, and Elizabeth II when she was born and died, that's useless information. But if you then think about 3 women who came to the throne as very, very young women who reigned for more time than any other monarchs in history, and their journey and what they have in common, and what was different about then, that starts to be interesting and exciting, and we can develop curiosity. So fundamentally, motivation.
And again, the storytelling techniques are very important, I think. And
Yes.
my next questions to you, you know, it's one thing to remember information, and we can develop strategies for doing that. And another very different animal is to get the information once you need the information. How many times we have seen students that come out of the test and they say, oh, the answer of the second question was this and this and this. So the information was there. They somehow managed to gather that information, but they don't have the correct strategy to take the information at the time they are needing that information. So can you share with us some can you shed some light on what's going on here? How can we improve that taking the information at the right time?
Yeah, remembering information is a 2-stage process. So we have to remember it, we have to input it, but then we also have to output it.
Yes.
And all the focus is on the inputting bit and not in the outputting bit. And actually, we need to do both of those things in a consistent way. So if we sit there and do the revision bit, the revising bit, so we revise what we with the strategy of inputting, without at the same time practicing the output, then that's what happens. We haven't got the strategy for outputting in place, the recall. We've got the remember in place, but not the recall. So we have to, when we have the good revision strategies, good review strategies include both input and output close together. Mm. So it's you know, remember it, bring it out again, remember it, bring it out again, in as many different ways as possible. The more flexible the outputting is, the recalling is, the easier it will be in the exam, because in the exam, unfortunately, you don't know exactly how the examiner is going to want you to output that data, to recall that data. So it may be surprising. It may not be, you may have done it in a very system. You may have done the list of the kings and queens, and you've remembered the list of the kings and queens, but then they want information about this one.
Yeah.
And you can't get to that one because it's all bound up in this list here. So remembering it and recalling it, and doing so in as many different ways as possible, means that you have the strategies in place for recalling and the flexibility in place to recall. And the other important thing is to have a strategy for revision and review that shifts the information from the short term to the long term memory. Mm-hmm. Now, good memories will put it in the long term memory, so it's there pretty permanently. Whereas it's very easy to just overload the short term memory, so it's all scattering around here. You go and you do your test, hopefully the right bits come out, and then you immediately forget all of it. And loads of students do this. I mean, I don't know what sort of learners you were when you did exams, but I mean, there were certain ones that I would just cram for and get through. Others that I loved, I saw the exam as the opportunity for me to show everybody how brilliant I was at this particular subject, whereas others was like, well, how short a length of time can I study for to get through this and pass it? So, you know, all of those things, motivation, determination, the right strategy, all of those pieces need to be in place. But certainly the recall is the bit we don't teach.
Yeah.
We teach the remember bit.
Yes.
So, you know, for example, if you're using a mind map, you've got your mind map, you've made it. Can you then draw it?
Yeah.
Can you pick one word or one concept of it and replicate the connections?
Yeah.
That will mean that you're building recall as opposed to just building memory.
Yeah.
Yes, I just share one small anecdote. We just followed a workshop in neuroscience and NLP. And I was all the time remembering the exercise that we did with you when you asked us to mime the brain, and I was the neurocortex,
Yeah.
and I was lying in the on the ground and saying, I am the neurocortex. And my main purpose in life is to do this and that. And I was remembering. So it's so important, as you say, to when we are teaching, to do it in many different ways, because it's going to have an impact in
all. You're right, but also not necessarily repetition can be dull. So so the thing was, you only did that exercise once and it was memorable.
Yeah.
It was partly because it was ridiculous. We made it. It was a ridiculous thing to do, to make all these people behave. Yes, it was.
It involved the body.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
it was great. And what I remember is the places where we all were, and the connections that we did. So yes, you are right. It was kind of ridiculous, but it was so much fun to do.
And it was, because it's memorable, it's big, and you can run that like a movie. So if you need to know what the frontal lobe does, you can run the movie of the exercise.
Absolutely.
Because it's memorable, and of course, if we don't make information memorable, why on earth would we want to remember it?
Yes.
And also, because it was fun, you want to remember it again, because it makes you smile when you remember being the neural cortex and that part of the brain. So
Super. We're slowly getting to the end, but we still have like one or two questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So one thing is that many people have some bad experiences at school, for instance, and they start to create some bad anchors about just the idea of learning. How can we overcome frustration, this kind of frustration or those anchors that prevent us from learning even more?
Well, you can use NLP. So, you know, I mean, it's about anchor, collapse the anchor. I think it's about using our state management, developing new resources, remembering that often when bad things have happened to us at school, it isn't because the person was mean or horrible or nasty or hated us. It's because they were just not very competent. Yeah. And so we need to reframe our experiences in a way that reflects. You know, if we're remembering a very bad time when we were 15, when a teacher said something horrible or something, we didn't learn something, or we were humiliated or whatever, then it's really easy to never want to go there again. But if we can understand, look at it and go, well, I'm not 15 now, and I can look at that, I can push it into the distance, I can run the movie, I can see that other things were going on there, then we're able to move on and do something different. So we can use all of the techniques of NLP to change our history and create better states and better strategies for learning. That's what the technology is for.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And one last question, Kate, and it's such an honor to have you, and I would like to extract as much information out of you, and you have shared so much. My question to you is, sometimes you have students that are amazing in school. I remember some of my schoolmates that they had the most amazing grades, and in life they just don't are able to manage anything. I don't know, they oh, what am I going to do once they go out in life? So they studied some more and some more and some more, and they weren't capable of being suitable for or successful in real life. So my question to you is, what is actual learning all about from your point of view?
Oh, just a small question at the end. Well, I think you're quite right. I think, and the problem is that school isn't always about learning. And you look, what we look at now, everything that we're teaching in schools, bar the basics of processes in terms of content. So in terms of processes, obviously, math, reading, writing, mathematics, computer science, various things, there are skills that we need to learn that are fundamental skills. There are more of them than there used to be, but the ones that we have always had, we still need to have. In terms of content, in terms of the actual content, almost everything that people are learning now will be irrelevant in 10 years' time. So content is the least significant, and still we are still going through what is on the curriculum. What studying the Romans, studying the whatever it is still on the curriculum. Whereas what we need to be doing is teaching thinking, and of course the whole area of emotional intelligence in terms of being able to manage our own feelings, our own responses, our own to think on purpose, as Richard calls it, but also to feel on purpose, to choose our feelings, to choose our beliefs, to choose our values, to think about who we are and what we want to be, so that we go out into the world with all of those skills armed to go on. What we have now is we have people who are successful in school and then underachieve, and then we have a lot of people who are not successful in school who overachieve, which only proves that school isn't a good measure of how successful people are going to be. Because it's not giving them the skills of resilience. And every now and again, schools, the education system tries. It tries to do, but it's usually got too many things to do. So, for example, there's there are quite a few initiatives that have been taken on board, and I can't remember the name of the one I was going to quote then. Using Thrive language, which is really about the whole thing about using effort, praising for effort rather than for cleverness. So, when we actually praise children and reward children for putting effort in rather than being innately clever, builds resilience, builds tenacity, builds determination. So we need to address those things, and it's not measuring success in the world, except in some public schools where really it's a matter of who you meet, not what you learn, but who you meet and what connections you make. In future. So I think again, and we can't overnight change the education system, but we can ensure that the children that we encounter, whenever we encounter them, we use those skill sets that we already have to help them to build that skill set into the future. I also think sometimes that people who are very successful at school end up going into teaching because they can't think about how they could possibly survive in the rest of the world. So they stay within the safe environment where they were successful.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you so
that's
much.
true. And just a last anecdote. You are talking about the change that can be made. I just went to a spectacle that in my son's school they created, and they had 1 week to choose things of the circus to do with, and they made a spectacle. A spectacle is
A show.
a show.
A show, yeah.
Yeah, circus
Circus
presentation.
show, yeah.
And it was amazing how when they did not they weren't able to do whatever, the children didn't judge themselves. And even in the presentation, they tried and tried again. And the emotion that the parents were, when you see a child that doesn't cannot do whatever thing that, and he tries again, and he fails, but it doesn't matter, and you see the resilience and the good energy of everyone targeting the cheering him to, oh, you can do it. And once they managed to achieve the as you say, the lit of in their face, and the emotion of, I can do this. It's just amazing. So I think you are giving, when I say you're giving us, I am thinking as a parent, because most of those children have parents. And I think that also education or the skills to thrive are, it's a responsibility as us as parents.
Yes, it is. And I think teaching excellence has turned out to be as useful to parents as it has to teachers. So maybe the next one is for parents.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kate. And we really recommend anybody to read the book Teaching Excellence. It's also in many other languages. It's in French, Enseignement d'Excellence. I think it is in other languages, right?
It's in Italian. It's published in Italian. We have a German, potential German translation. We have the Spanish translation, but it's not published yet, but hopefully it will be very soon.
So yeah, we really recommend this book. It's amazing. And it will be indicated below the video, but where can people get in touch with you concerning teaching excellence?
Just through, you can email me on my meta-nlp.co.uk, either inquiries or KTAT. You can contact me directly. I do answer my emails most of the time. I do. And the books are available on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you.
Really a pleasure and an honor to have you with us.
And also very many thanks to all those watching this video, this event. And we really hope to see you at some point, either on a training with Kate or with us or with anybody else. And we wish you all the best.
Yes, and thank you to Tony Buzan, because he inspires us and keep doing it over and over again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.